It's often been said that the greatest two words in all of sports are Game 7, and it makes sense why that is. After all, the 7-game championship series format has been a staple of North American sports for decades now, and when it comes to creating dramatic and compelling moments in the world of sports, there's nothing that does it better than a do-or-die, winner-take-all Game 7. However, in 1912, two teams would meet in the World Series, and together they would figure out that there is only one thing better than a Game 7, and that is a Game 8. This is the story of the World Series that went 8 games. This is Sports Oddity. Now before I get started, I feel like I have to give a bit of a disclaimer here, because technically this isn't the only time that a World Series has gone to an 8th game. In fact, it's happened 3 other times before in Major League history. However, this is the only time that it has happened in a 7-game series. If that sounds confusing to you, well, that's because it kinda is. So to help explain things a little bit better, I brought in somebody with a little bit more of an expertise on the Wild West of old school baseball.
This is Jeremy, and he knows a lot about baseball, so much in fact that he may be considered by some as a fan. He thinks the World Series has always been 7 games though, and as many of us know, Jeremy here is incredibly wrong. It's 1903, the first year of Major League Baseball's existence, and they are about to play a championship game. They will call it the World Series, but need to decide how long it will be, and settle on a best of 9 because, well, that makes sense. Shortly after, though, the series would be switched to 7 games prior to the 1905 World Series. But this would not be the last of the 9-game World Series, as shortly after World War I, the 1919 and 1921 series were switched to 9 games for who knows what reason.
Well, that's certainly exciting. I never knew that.
Happy to be of assistance, Mr. Jeremy.
A huge thank you to Retro Baseball for that explainer. You can check out his channel using the link down in the description below. But for now, let's get back into the story. The year was 1912, and the Boston Red Sox were having quite a year for themselves. After finishing in 5th place the previous season, the Red Sox would go on to win 105 games in 1912 under the leadership of new player-manager Jake Stahl, not only winning Boston their 2nd AL pennant, but also doing so in their brand new ballpark, which was named Fenway Park due to the neighborhood that it was built in. On the other side of the equation were the New York Giants, who were consistently one of the best teams in the National League. Between 1903 and 1913, the Giants had just 2 seasons where they finished below 2nd in the standings. In 1911, they posted yet another first-place finish in the National League, and 1912 would bring on more of the same, as they would win 103 games behind manager John McGraw and pitcher Christy Mathewson. Heading into the World Series that year, it was shaping up to be a compelling battle between the 2 best teams in baseball, and they did not disappoint. Game 1 would set the tone early, as the Red Sox would go into the Polo Grounds and sneak away with a 4-3 comeback victory. However, it was Game 2 that would ultimately dictate the direction of the series. This game had all the characteristics of a really good prize fight, with both teams taking turns landing jabs and haymakers all throughout the afternoon. With Mathewson on the mound, Boston managed to score 3 unearned runs in the bottom of the 1st inning. The Giants then responded with runs in the 2nd and the 4th, before Boston responded with yet another run in the 5th. But then it was the Giants' turn to land a huge blow, as 2 ground rule doubles in the top of the 8th landed them 3 runs and a 5-4 lead. However, that lead would be short-lived, as Boston would score another run in the bottom of the inning, and the game would eventually go into extra innings. Both teams would score in the 10th inning, ultimately making it a 6-6 ball game heading into the 11th. But at that point in the afternoon, other factors were starting to play a major role in the outcome, most specifically, the time. You have to remember, this game is being played in the middle of New England in the middle of fall, so sunlight is a very limited resource, and at that point in the afternoon, it was getting real low. Knowing the importance of the game, the umpires tried to push things as far as they possibly could, but when both teams failed to score in the 11th inning, the umpires had no other choice but to call the game because of darkness. Now, if this game were being played under modern MLB rules, the game would be resumed the very next day from the point at which it was suspended. However, this rule was not around in 1912, and in fact, back then, they would do something that would be considered completely blasphemous to a modern MLB fan. They called the game a tie. So as the series shifted to Game 3 the very next day, Boston would once again enter the game technically up 1-0 on the Giants. Over the next few games, we would see a lot more close action between the two teams, as pitching would go on to start defining the series. In Game 3, the Giants would prevail 2-1, largely behind the brilliant pitching performance of Rube Marquard. In Game 4 at the Polo Grounds, Boston would respond, as Smokey Joe Wood would throw a gem of his own, and the Red Sox would defeat the Giants 3-1. The very next night, the Red Sox would move to within one win of the World Series, as they defeated the Giants 2-1 at Fenway Park in an hour and 43 minutes? Jeez, that's not something you see every day. Robbie, my man, you might need to take some notes here. Anyway, with their third loss of the series, the Giants had their backs up against the wall. After losing the World Series in the previous season, New York had their minds set on getting back to the Fall Classic in 1912 and finally finishing the job this time. And with elimination now on the line, they started playing like it. In Game 6, it would only take 5 runs to take care of Boston and force a Game 7. And in that Game 7, at Fenway, the Giants would bring a whole new meaning to the term Boston Massacre, absolutely dismantling the Red Sox by a score of 11-4. But of course, that was no ordinary Game 7. Instead of being the decisive game of the series like it normally would be, that win only tied the series at 3 wins apiece, with the tie in Game 2 still technically on the books and serving as the difference maker. Meaning that for the first and only time in Major League history, the World Series was going to have to go to an extra tiebreaker game. And when the time came, the game did not disappoint. Given the general pattern of this series to this point, you might be absolutely shocked to learn that Game 8 would turn out to be a pitcher's duel. For the Giants, they of course gave the ball to Christy Mathewson, and to his credit, he pitched brilliantly through the first 9 innings of the game, with his only blemish coming off a run in the 7th inning. The Red Sox, meanwhile, had to take a different approach. Because Smokey Joe Wood got absolutely shelled in Game 7, Boston felt like they had to throw a new look at the Giants, and so they started rookie Hugh Bedian on the mound for this all-important Game 8, and to his credit, he pitched brilliantly, pushing out 7 innings of work and only giving up 1 run. However, heading into the top of the 8th inning, the Red Sox were facing a pivotal moment. They had just scored a run off Mathewson to tie up the game, and they needed to bring somebody into the game that could shut down the Giants' lineup the rest of the way. Of course, there were probably plenty of pitchers on Boston's roster that they could have turned to in a time like this. But given the seriousness of the situation, and given that the title was on the line, they realistically only had one choice. And so, in a gutsy move, they sent out Smokey Joe to start the top of the 8th inning and take them the rest of the way. And unlike his disastrous start in Game 7, he absolutely shut down the Giants' lineup, and ultimately forced the game to go to extra innings. However, he did run into a bit of trouble in the top of the 10th, and a single by Fred Merkle, yes, that Fred Merkle, put up the Giants by 1 run heading into the bottom half of the inning. But with 3 outs standing between them and elimination, the Red Sox got to work. After an error by the center fielder, a flyout, and a walk to start the inning, Tris Speaker hit a single that tied up the game at 2. And then, after an intentional walk loaded up the bases, it would ultimately be Larry Gardner who would play the hero for Boston, hitting a sacrifice fly that brought in the game-winning run from third base. and in fact, to this day, it is still the only time in baseball history that the World Series has ever been ended by a sacrifice fly. Boston's World Series victory that year would be officially listed with a record of 4 wins, 3 losses, and 1 tie. Something that, as long as current rules stay the same, will never happen again in Major League Baseball history. Across the nearly 120 World Series that have taken place over the years, there have been no shortage of memorable, bizarre, and iconic moments, many of them happening in Game 7s. But in my opinion, for the uniqueness of the moment and the bizarre rarity of the situation, plus the fact it will never happen again, 1912 has to go down as one of, if not the, most memorable and bizarre World Series of all time. And in my opinion, we should probably remember it a little bit more than we do, if only to remember just how cool it is to say the name Smokey Joe Wood.